mitzvah is a greater mitzvah than the first mitzvah, stronger mitzvah than the first mitzvah. But I still, if I'm engaged in mitzvah number one, I have to stay course. I'm exempt. See, the question, it's a good question. Does it mean it's forbidden for me to stop? Or I'm just exempt from doing the second mitzvah? The language is osek b'mitzvahs patur minham. I'm exempt from doing the second mitzvah. I'm involved in mitzvah, in the first mitzvah. So some explain that that's what the Ritva says. One explanation that the pasuk teaches us, the way Ritva says you're not allowed to stop the first mitzvah. If you're engaged in this mitzvah, it's not respectful to stop the first mitzvah. Since you are obligated, since you're involved, you have to stay connected with the first mitzvah that you're involved in. Because since you're exempt from the second mitzvah, so one explanation Ritva says the second mitzvah is like you have no obligation. So the first mitzvah you're obligated to do, the second mitzvah you're exempt. So once you're exempt, that second mitzvah is no longer on you. It's no longer on you. You can't stop for mitzvah number one to perform mitzvah number two. Because that mitzvah is not obligatory. That's the first approach. It's interesting that he's learning that way because the language of the Gemara is osik b'mitzvah patur. It says you're exempt. It doesn't say you can't stop this, do the other mitzvah. It says you're exempt from doing the other mitzvah. And Ritva is learning in one answer that actually are not allowed to stop mitzvah number one in order to perform mitzvah number two. And the Gemara was looking for a source for this law. And the Gemara brought a pasuk from Shema. The Gemara says, but by the Shema, it says the obligation to recite the Shema is belechtecha baderech. When you're going for your personal purposes on the road, then you have an obligation to say the Shema. But if you're going for, if you're involved in a mitzvah, then you will not have the obligation to go ahead and say the Shema, because you're engaged in the first mitzvah that will exempt you from the second mitzvah. Like we said, there is discussion. What is the situation that you'll be exempt from the second mitzvah? Is it only if the second mitzvah would take you away from the first mitzvah? But if it would not take you away at all, if it wouldn't hinder the first mitzvah, you would still have to do both, or not. You know, how far does this engaged in one mitzvah exempt you from the other mitzvah? Does it mean that, you know what, it's as if I have no response, the other mitzvah's not here, and therefore, even if I could perform the other mitzvah, and then come back to mitzvah number one, I'm not obligated to do that? Or is only that if I'm engaged in this mitzvah, and if I will do the second mitzvah, it's going to hinder my performance of the first mitzvah, that's when I'm exempt from the second mitzvah. But if I could do both, I definitely supposed to go ahead and do both. So that's a discussion in the commentaries, exactly what, how far does this engagement in one mitzvah, when do we apply the law? When you're engaged in mitzvah number one, you're exempt from the second mitzvah. Now the Gemara brought a pasuk, and now the Gemara is questioning, why do you need, we have a different verse. We seem to have a different verse teach us this law. We don't need to have two psukim. The Torah doesn't need to tell us two different places to teach us one law. The usual thing is, if the Torah wants to teach us something, it tells us once, gives us one source, and that's sufficient. And if the Torah is going to tell us two sources for a rule, you have to know why. Why should the Torah go out of its way to tell us two different sources for the same point? And we sometimes we have a rule sometimes that we say, if two verses are coming to tell us the same thing, maybe it's telling us that it's limited to only to do these two situations, but not maybe they're not coming to tell us for the rest of the Torah. Meaning, if you want to tell us a law for the whole Torah, so you tell us in one place, and that one place is the source for the whole Torah. That's called Amam Tzinu. We find something in one place, and that's teaching us for the rest of the Torah. But when you are saying, but if the Torah goes and tells us the same rule, the same one, two places, we say that perhaps the Torah is telling you that this law is limited to specifically these two places. So here the Gemara is questioning, what do I need? You're telling me we learned the law of engaged in one mitzvah, you are exempt from doing the other mitzvah. Let's say according to the Ritva, even if the second mitzvah is a greater mitzvah than the first mitzvah, you're exempt from doing that if you're engaged in mitzvah number one. You don't have to stop mitzvah number one to do mitzvah number two, and you maybe might not be allowed to because of the rule of engaged in one mitzvah. You're exempt from the second mitzvah. And you're telling me you learned that out from the pasuk of Shema, where the Torah tells you the obligation of Shema is only when you're engaged in personal pursuit. You go for business purposes, your own personal needs, then you have to go ahead and say the Shema. But if you're involved in some other mitzvah, you don't have to say the Shema. We have a different pasuk. That's where the Gemara is opening up today. The Gemara opens up, it's on Art Scroll 25a, 25a4, on the first column. Do we learn this rule that engaged in one mitzvah, you're exempt from a second mitzvah? We learn it from this ruling that's stated by Shema. Mehatam nafka. We have a different pasuk. What's the different source? The Tanya. We learned in the Braita. Vahi anashim asher hayu tameim lenefesh adam. There were people that were tamei lenefesh adam. Good morning, Simon. What was the situation? This is the people we ended yesterday's class discussing these people. They were contaminated. They had come in contact with a dead body, and as a result of that, they were not able to bring the korban Pesach, the Pesach offering on Pesach that's supposed to be slaughtered on the 14th of Nisan and eaten on the 15th at night. They weren't able to bring this offering because they were contaminated. Now, the Gemara identified what was the source, why were they contaminated, what was the situation. So, Otama Nashim Mihayu, who were these people? So the Gemara says, the ones that some say the ones that buried Nadav Avihu, right? So the Gemara says the following. So first, I hear so the Gemara says like this: who are these people? No say Aronon Shel Yosef. Divrei Yosef Glili. Yosef Glili says these people were the ones that carried the Aron of Nadav of Yosef. The first opinion is Yosef, meaning. What happened? Yosef told the Jewish people, he told his brothers, and they swore to him that when they leave Egypt, they're going to take his bones with them. So these people were the ones that carried the bones of Yosef. And because they carried the bones of Yosef, they were contaminated through the bones of Yosef. Divrei Yosef Glili. That's the opinion of Yosef Glili. Now, Rashi fills in the blank. We're talking about here, just to give a little perspective, we're talking about this is the second year after they went out of Egypt. Meaning the first year when they left Egypt, that year that they left, they brought the Korban Pesach. That was one of the big merits that they had. They took the sheep of Egypt, which was the lamb of Egypt, which was the Avodah Zarah, which is the god they would worship. The Egyptians worshipped the sheep, because the sheep made them very wealthy, the wool and the milk, the wool, and the Jews also became worshippers of the idol, of the sheep. And one of the things that Hashem said to the Jewish people, before you leave Egypt, you got to go ahead and slaughter the sheep. You got to slaughter the sheep, slaughter the Avodah Zarah, and after you slaughter it, you're going to eat it that night. And after they ate it, then that's the night that when Hashem killed all the firstborns of the Egyptians, and in the morning the Jewish people left. That's the background of the Korban Pesach, of the Pesach offering. That was the year that they left. The following year, they were told to bring a Korban Pesach. They already are in the desert. The Jewish people were in the desert, and they were told to bring that on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. They set up the Mishkan. The Mishkan was set up on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and that day, the happiness of the day was very much tampered with the fact that Nadav Avihu died on that day on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So the first opinion says that the people who were tamei, who were contaminated, were the people who carried the Aron of Yosef, Divrei Rabbi Yosef Haglili. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Haglili. And Rabbi Akiva, now we're turning the page. So Rabbi Yosef Haglili says that the people who were carried the Aron, and we know also it says about Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Vayikach Moshe es Asmot Yosef. Moshe was when the Jewish people left Egypt, he ran, he went to do the mitzvah. When everybody was taking the biza of the Yam, there was a lot of spoils in the sea. When there was Kriyat Yam Suf, when there was a splitting of the sea, which we say Oz Yashir, Moshe B'nai Yisrael in the morning, when there was a splitting of the sea, then the Egyptians, when they went to war against the Jewish people, similar to there's a war now, and that this war should end, similar to the way the war of the Egyptian war ended. What did the Egyptians go? They took their horses, they adorned their chariots, their horses with beautiful jewelry and so on and so forth. So the Jewish people were busy collecting the spoils, right, Mr. Haber? They were collecting the spoils from the Yam Suf. But Moshe went and he took the bones of Yosef. He took the bones of Yosef. But remember, that was almost a year ago. That's about a year ago that Moshe took the bones. Moshe wasn't carrying the bones all the time, but the other people that were carrying the bones. So now it was Nosei Arono, it was the people that carried the bones of Yosef. They were the ones that were contaminated. We are on 25b1 now. Rabbi Akiva takes issue. He says it's Mishael vel Safon Hayim. It was Mishael and El Safon. Shoy Oskim, they were involved in Nadav Avihu. Mishael and El Safon, they were cousins of Nadav Avihu, and they were involved in taking care of Nadav Avihu. Because Nadav Avihu, when Nadav Avihu died on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, so they were told to take their bodies. Moshe told Eshol and Safon, who were cousins, to take the bodies of Nadav Avihu outside the camp. So if they went and they took the bodies outside the camp, so therefore Eshol and Safon became contaminated. And even though Nadav Avihu, he says that their bodies remained. There was enough of parts of their body, because it says there was a sreifa, even though there was some sort of burning that went out from Hashem, that they got burned, but their bodies, there's enough of their bodies that remained that could contaminate people who came in contact with those bodies. And when comes Rabbi Akiva says it was these people, Mishal V'Asaf. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer. Rabbi Yitzchak disagrees with those two opinions. He says it was not, it was not Nadav, it was not the people carrying the body of Nadav Avihu, and it was not the people who were carrying the Aron of Yosef. Why? Because Kfar, Im Nosei Aron of Yosef Hayu, if they were the people that carried the coffin of Yosef, they could have already become Taher. Because remember, they came out of they camped, the Jewish people, when they went into the desert, they came to Midbar Sinai. And eventually, they camped in the 3rd month of the year. They came out on Nisan, the 15th of Nisan. Nisan is Sivan. In Sivan, on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, they camped on Midbar Sinai. They came to the desert of Sinai, and that's where they camped. So when they camped there, they could put the bones down. They don't have to carry the bones. They're not traveling. And they were there from Sivan past the following Nisan, past this time period where they're bringing the Korban Pesach. So the time they're bringing the Korban Pesach right now, they're not traveling. They're not on the move. They haven't been moving since Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Sivan, Iyar, Tammuz, of Elul, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevi, Shvat, Adar, Nisan. For all these months, they have been staying in the same location. So he says, they had time, those people who carried the bones of Yosef, they had time to go ahead and purify themselves with the ashes of the paraduma. They could go ahead and they had it's a 7-day process. They sprinkled the ashes on the 3rd and the 7th day. So they had a long time. For months, they could have been already purified. Ella, and also, Mishal v'Safan, and if the people that the Torah is talking about is Mishael and Al-Safan, who carried the bodies of Nadav and Avihu, Yecholim hayu l'taher. They also could have become mourning. They could have been tahar because they had 7 days. It's a 7-day process. So if they go ahead and they carry the body of Nadav and Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they took it out of the camp. They buried the Nadav Avihu on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So we're talking. Now Pesach is 14 days later. So it's a 7-day process to purify oneself. But since it's a 7-day process to purify oneself, they should have been already pure by this time already. So Yecholata Ella Oskin Meis Mitzvah Hayu. These people were people who were involved with they had lost a close relative. And there's a mitzvah for the people who lose their close relatives to be involved in the burial, to make themselves, contaminated. And they were involved in the burial of their close family member. And Shechal Shvi Shalahem Liot Be'erev Pesach. And the 7th day, the case here we're talking about is their 7th day came out to be on Erev Pesach. That means that they had buried their close relative 7 days ago, but you needed it's a 7-day process to purify oneself. And the 7th day was still, the day that they had their 7th day of their processing, they were still contaminated. So let's say tonight is Pesach, right? Let's say tonight is the holiday of Pesach. If the holiday of Yom Tov of Pesach begins tonight. But when the Yom Tov of Pesach begins tonight, this afternoon, after Chatzot, after midday, is the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach. But you need to be tahar. You need to be pure at the time of the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach. They were still tamei. Their process wasn't over until the nighttime. So technically at night, they're going to be pure. They're going to be tahar. But when you slaughter the Korban Pesach, anybody who is part of the slaughtering of the Korban Pesach, they have to be tahar. The slaughtering, even if you're not slaughtering it yourself, if somebody's slaughtering it for you, it has to be that the slaughtering for somebody that is tahar. So Shachal Shvi Shalem L'Yud Be'er Pesach. Why and where is it? Where do we see this? Because Nema v'lo yochlu la'asot ha'Pesach b'yom hahu. They couldn't bring the Korban Pesach on that day. B'yom hahu in yochlu la'asot. on that day they couldn't bring the Korban Pesach. What's the emphasis they couldn't bring it? You could just say there were people that were tamei, they were contaminated, and they couldn't bring the Pesach. Why does the Torah tell me they were contaminated and they weren't able to bring the Pesach by Yom Ahu? By Yom Ahu, why does it say on that day they couldn't bring the Pesach? What's the emphasis? If you tell me the Tamei, of course they can't bring the Korban Pesach. If you tell me the contaminated, like Simon said, the pasuk is saying they can't bring the Pesach on that day, but tomorrow they could bring the Korban Pesach. But still, they still considered contaminated now at the time of slaughtering the Korban Pesach, and they can't bring it. But tomorrow, they're able to bring the Korban Pesach, and so if we see from here, when these people contaminated themselves 7 days before Pesach, they knew, let's say it was Chet Nisan, Chet, Tet, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet. So they had a relative that passed away on the 8th day of Nisan. They know, because Hashem already told them that you have to bring you're going to need to bring a Korban Pesach on the 15th of Nisan, and the 14th you need to slaughter. You have to eat it on the 15th, the night of the 15th, and the 14th you have to slaughter the Korban Pesach. You know that if you go ahead and you involved in burying the person today, you're going to lose out on the mitzvah on Korban Pesach. And so now we see that your involvement in this mitzvah of burying this person would even, it better make yourself tamei, make yourself contaminate, engage in this mitzvah, even though you're going to miss out on a mitzvah that's even greater in a certain sense. Let's say in bringing the Korban Pesach. I mean, I presume because you could say the person you could technically do. So you miss. So we see that engagement in this mitzvah, you're exempt from doing another mitzvah, even though that second mitzvah might be greater. You're going to miss out. Okay, let's say there's a mitzvah in the Torah to bury a person. Okay, and there's a mitzvah in the Torah to bring a korban Pesach. So delaying a burial, let's say, is but you have this other mitzvah to do, and you could technically do this mitzvah. Technically, you would have that. So the question is, if we say when you're involved in this mitzvah, automatically that we say, don't say hold off from doing this mitzvah because you have a stronger mitzvah in the future. We say you have this mitzvah in front of you, do this mitzvah, and you'll be exempt from the second mitzvah. So we see from here that when you're engaged in one mitzvah, you're exempt from the other mitzvah. You're engaged in this mitzvah you're going to be engaged in this mitzvah of burial. That will exempt you from the other mitzvah. So the Gemara says, so what do I need? So the Gemara's question is, why do I need the second pasuk? Why do I need two pasukim to tell us the same thing? But we have a pasuk by Shema that tells us when you're engaged in the mitzvah of Shema, you're exempt from the mitzvah of the mitzvah when you're engaged in a mitzvah, you're exempt from Shema, because the only time the Torah obligates you to say the Shema It's when you are engaged in personal pursuit, then you have the mitzvah Shema. And also we see from over here that you are, if you look at Rashi says, Shachal Shvi Shelahem. The Rashi says like this. The Rashi says, even though they will be permitted at night, even though at night they are going to be tahar, they're going to be pure, but during the daytime, the time of stoning the Korban Pesach, they will be contaminated. So we see osik b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah, because they intentionally made themselves tamei. They intentionally went to bury their relative, even though this contamination will hold them back from eating their Korban Pesach. So we see, Rashi said, if you have a mitzvah, even if the mitzvah is lighter than the other mitzvah, because you're going to lose out the eating of the Korban Pesach, you don't need to push off that lighter mitzvah and say, you know what, I'm not going to contaminate myself to bury this person now. I don't need to push that off in order to perform a stronger mitzvah that's going to come in the future. So the Gemara says, so why do I need two sources for the same teaching? So the Gemara says the following. I need both cases. Why? The Yashmin Hatam, if you'll tell me the story by Pesach Sheni, Mishum de Lomatas Man Chiyuva de Pesach. You know why I could be engaged in the first mitzvah of burial, and I'm not, even though I'm going to miss out the second mitzvah, because the mitzvah of Korban Pesach didn't come yet. When does the mitzvah of Korban Pesach come? When the 14th in the afternoon comes. Now I'm on day 8 of the month, and there was someone's relative, close relative, someone's close relative passed away, so he has in front of him a mitzvah to bury this person now. The fact is, if he contaminates himself to this relative, let's say there's other people that are already contaminated, not him. So the idea of the person being buried, the person's going to be buried. They're not going to violate the lo saseh, don't leave him overnight. So it's not a question that, let's say, it's not a question that a violation of a lo saseh is going to happen as a result of delay. It's only, there's a special mitzvah that the relative himself should make himself contaminated. So here we have a mitzvah for the 7 close relatives, the husband, the wife, let's say the husband for a wife or for a child, for a parent, the 7 close relatives that a person has to go ahead and contaminate himself for. So that's the mitzvah that's on the table. There's a mitzvah. Should he himself, the close relative, take care of the body, or should someone else take care of the body? It's not the close relative who's already contaminated, let's say. So we say that close relative has a mitzvah to take care of that body. So there's a special mitzvah on the close relative. Even though, as a result of him being involved with his close relative, he's going to lose out the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, which is a much stronger mitzvah than the mitzvah of a close relative burying the relative, or bringing the Korban Pesach morning. So we see that involvement in the mitzvah supersedes even a lighter mitzvah supersedes a stronger mitzvah. So the Gemara says no proof, because only over there the second mitzvah was not in front of me. He never had the mitzvah when he went ahead and contaminated himself. There was no second mitzvah in front of him. He didn't have the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach, because it was the 8th day of the month. There was no obligation of the Korban Pesach. Of al-hacha, but here, regarding Kriya Shema, the matazma Kriya Shema, when he was involved, the mitzvah that he's involved with let's say during that night that he got married, the Kriya Shema, the mitzvah of Kriya Shema already was here. He wasn't, let's say he wasn't engaged in the mitzvah yet, but the mitzvah, he has a mitzvah in front of him. He has in front of him the mitzvah that he's going to be with his wife the first night, and he has a mitzvah of Shema. So since while he's being engaged, while he's engaged in this mitzvah, the mitzvah is in front of him. Meaning, in the case when by the person who passed away, when he buries the person, the other mitzvah is not here. On the 8th day, he buries the person. The mitzvah of Pesach is not coming until after he already completed the mitzvah. But here, the night of the marriage, when he's involved in the mitzvah of marriage, the mitzvah is already here. It's a mitzvah in front of him of the Shema. So maybe you would say, maybe you have to stop this mitzvah to do the other mitzvah. So the mother's makris ema. So I might have said ema lo. Maybe he would have to read the Shema and stop his focus on thinking about this mitzvah of what he's doing tonight to say the Shema. Therefore, it's tzricha. Therefore, you need to tell me that you are still exempt, even though the second mitzvah is here. You're still exempt if you're involved in this mitzvah. You don't need to put it away this mitzvah to do the second mitzvah. We'll continue tomorrow on the other side of the Sricha of the Gemara. Okay, I want to wish everyone a beautiful day.